So for the last several weeks, we've been talking about generosity and what does it mean to live that out as a lifestyle. We've talked about the reason we live generously is because we're created in the image of God. And if God is extravagantly generous with us, how can we not be extravagantly generous with our lives as well? That's the only way that we can represent Him to the people around us. And so 2 weeks ago, we talked about how do we do that with the stuff that we have, our possessions, our money, our things. What can we do practically to enable us to live generously? Because we don't want to just give out of our leftovers. We want to give purposefully, intentionally, creatively, in ways that say, I'm doing this because God has told me to do it. In the same way that last week we talked about how do we do that with our time and our attention, because we can always get more stuff, we can always make more money, but I only have a limited supply of attention and time. And in a lot of ways that makes that so much more valuable when I give it away. So how do I use that to generously bless others the way God has generously blessed us? But there's this thing that gets in the way of all of the things we're trying to do when it comes to living generously. And it's something that I struggle with. It's something that when we're talking about the rest of this today, it's not something I have completely figured out. It's something that God is continuing to work on in me and in my life. But I recognize that there is this almost counterintuitive thing that keeps me from living the way I want to live with generosity. I am horrible at saying no. Now it seems like if you want to be good at being generous, you want people to say yes more. But the truth is, I can't say yes when I should. I can't say yes in the ways I want to. I can't say yes in the extravagantly. I can't say yes spontaneously like I want to, because I haven't been really good at saying no to a lot of other things. I don't like saying no. I think anyone who's not a toddler doesn't really enjoy saying no that much to themselves or to others, because no does a couple of things that aren't fun. When I'm saying no, it's not fun because I'm acknowledging that there's limits, and my pride and my dreams do not like to have limits placed on them. My kids, when we go to the Target, when they were real little, every time we went to Target especially, they wanted to buy something. They'd see something, they'd like it, they'd want it, and I had to teach them over and over again every time, no, we can't get something each time. Maybe that week we only have enough to get like the Tylenol or the toilet paper. We don't have time or money to go and find some Lego set that you like that you can have this week. And learning that there was a limit on funds, not only was it not fun for them, but I didn't like being reminded about it in the moment. I don't like being reminded that I only have 24 hours in a day, that I only have so much energy, and that if I don't use those in the right ways, that there's a limit on what I can accomplish, there's a limit on what I can participate in, there's a limit on what I can get done. And I will try sometimes to squeeze in more than I should, and I realize at the end of that time I've got two things. I'm usually frustrated, and I'm definitely exhausted. Like the kind of exhausted that takes your flashlight on your phone to go out and look what you are missing. And you know what you're missing the whole time you're using this flashlight on your phone? You're missing your phone. You just are too tired to realize it. Saying no isn't fun because it says there's limits, and our pride doesn't like to have it. The other thing that saying no does that isn't fun is it reminds us that there might be some people that don't like us if we say no. And I am someone who, I like when people like me. I'll be honest with you. I want you to like me. I want you to think I'm kind. I want you to maybe think I'm impressive. I want you to think well of me. And it can be easy to try and perform in a way that gets that reaction from you. And one of the easiest ways to get you to like me is to do what you want me to do. So when you ask me to do something, my first instinct always is to say yes, because I don't want you to not like me. I'm worried maybe that I won't be able to get what I need from you if I say no to you. I maybe not be able to get something that I like later. I might not like the way you would have consequences against me if you don't like me. And so I want to say yes. And I just want my kids sometimes to like me. So when I have to tell them no and their sad face comes in, there's parts of me that just wants to move heaven and earth to be able to do whatever they're asking for, right? And I want to impress maybe my boss, and so I will do more and more and more work until I reach the point where I'm at home grumbling because not only do I have no more space to do anything in the office, I have no more space to do anything at home. Because I just keep saying yes to whatever it is that's asked of me because I want people to like me. No isn't fun too because a lot of us were raised in a way that saying no doesn't always equal being good. That's not what good people do. That's not what kind people do. That's not what nice people do. And if I say no, then I'm not polite, I'm not nice, I'm not kind, people will think I'm selfish. And there is social pressure in different situations to say yes to things that are being asked of you. I have some friends of ours that are helping with one of the things that Elijah is involved with. And there's some transitions going on in leadership, and so they need some more adult help. And I've been hesitating to jump in that for a couple of reasons. One of that being time, one of that being giving him some space where there's not always mom and dad involved, those sorts of things. But they reached out to us, and this was the thing. And they didn't do anything wrong. I just want to make that clear. They didn't do anything wrong like this. But it definitely added pressure to the ask. Every other family has an adult involved. Would you be willing to help too? There's pressure there to say yes. And for a lot of us, the way that we end up saying yes is because the pressure is so great that if we say no, the shame or the guilt or the expectations would just be too great, and we can't do it. I love when there are passages of Scripture that I read and the characters and the people that we read about are people just like me. That I think this person gets how I feel. They get what I'm struggling with. In Luke chapter 10, he writes about a woman named Martha who I think feels like I feel a lot of the times when I don't know how to say no. In chapter 10 of Luke, starting in verse 38, we're introduced to her this way. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Now Martha has said yes to get herself into this situation. You have to realize that, right? Martha invited Jesus and his disciples into her home. Whether she did that because she genuinely wanted to see Jesus and have him there and help take care of him. Maybe there was social pressure in the community to have the rabbi that was traveling through come and stay at her home. Maybe it was like the expectations, like we're the house that when strangers come through, we are the hospitality people. It didn't matter. It could be all those things or none of those things, but she said yes to having Jesus come. So she set herself up for this situation. And she meant good. And the things that she was doing were good things, right? Jesus is not going to eat unless Martha gets something going. The place is not going to have room for all the people that are there to be comfortable and feel welcome unless there's some cleaning and some rearranging of furniture and all of that stuff that needs to happen in this place. The problem is she is completely overwhelmed by trying to keep up that everything that needs to get done. And maybe, just maybe, she thought she'd have some help. Because there's her sister Mary. And Mary isn't in the kitchen with her. She's not out back making sure that the linens are drying. She's not sweeping cobwebs out of the corner. She is sitting down at Jesus' feet. You think Martha doesn't want to be there? You don't think that she would rather be with the rabbi, with the master? The one she invited into her home? You think she doesn't want to be spending time with that person? But instead, she's got to get things done. She said yes to all of this stuff. And it needs to happen. And she is left with a life that is filled with some frustration and filled with some bitterness, and she's done with it. And so she comes up to Jesus, and instead of throwing up her hands and just sitting down with him, she basically says, Jesus, you need to give Mary a swift kick so that we can go and take care of what needs to get taken care of and take care of you, because we have stuff to do. We have things that need to happen. We can't just sit here like this. And Jesus replies to to Martha, with a no. In verse 41, he says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and you are upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. You want Mary to go help you in the kitchen? That's a no from me. I'm not going to make her go do that. And in fact, Martha, you should learn to say no to some things yourself. All of these things that you're worried about, all these good things are distractions. And they're taking you away from the thing that is best. They're taking you away from being with me. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, Jesus is preaching to the crowd, and he says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well. All of the other stuff that we so often put as a priority over being with Jesus, over seeking his kingdom. Things like food and dishes and cleaning the house and making sure the lines on the lawn are spot on and making sure our kids are in every possible activity so they're quote-unquote well-rounded. All of these things we do, and they won't be lined up like they're supposed to in our life unless we have him and time with him first. If we keep doing what everyone expects, if we keep doing what our own mind puts pressure on us to do, if we keep doing what we think needs to happen, if we keep saying yes to everything, we will miss out on what is best that God is offering. We will end up like Martha, with Jesus in our house, right there with us, and instead of being able to sit and soak in his presence, we are too distracted by everything else to be with him and receive what he has to offer us. And we are missing out because we can't say no. Our lack of a no leaves no room to follow, to obey, or to be with Jesus. But when we learn to say no, we learn to prioritize what we actually value in our lives. We put what's most important in its proper place. We seek first his kingdom. And one thing I got to ask you is, do you even know what your values are? There are some values that as followers of Jesus are just going to be universally true. Seeking first after God, caring for our spiritual life has to be a priority, has to be something we value. But there's other things that might change seasonally, like making sure your kids aren't jerks might be an important thing when you're younger in your adulthood. Your health, being generous, all of these things are things that could be values. And if you don't know what you value, you'll never be able to organize your life in a way to know what to say no to and what to say yes to. So invite God into the conversation of figuring out what it is that needs to be priority for you today. I promise you, he would love to give you an answer. And then once you get that, use them. Use what you actually value to set up your budget. So you plan in advance to intentionally use what God has given you in a way that lines up with what you value. Use it to set your calendars. Use it to say, I'm going to say yes to this, because it lines up with what I feel God is calling me to. But this one, even though it's good, doesn't do that. So I can say no to it to make sure I have room for these things that God has lined up for me. It's kind of like when you're trying to fill a jar and you want to get the things into the jar first. Okay, so you've got sand and you've got small stones and you've got big stones. And you want to make sure you can fit as many of the big stones, the big important things in the jar as possible. If you start filling it up with the sand first and maybe some of the smaller stones, you're only going to get a couple of the big stones in. All the space has been taken. A better way to go about it is to start with the big stones and place them into the jar. When you place them in, you make sure they fit, because there's nothing that's going to get in the way of them. They are the priority. And then after you get those in, then you can take some of the smaller stones. There might be good things, but maybe not quite as important. And maybe they're value adjacent. And you put those in. And as they get in, they go and fit in around the larger stones. And you're not going to get all of those in, but you're going to get a good number of in. They're going to fill in the space. But you still have more space left after that. And so that's when you take some of the sand, some of the smaller things. Maybe the sand can be the things that they're not that important, but they're good, they're fun, they're things you like to do. They might be like, I'm going to take a couple of minutes and scroll through Facebook for a minute. I'm going to do something here. And you're going to take some of those things and you're going to put that in. And those things, the sand will fill in around the littler stones and around the big stones. And you'll not get all the sand in, but you'll get some of them in. But the big thing that's important is those large priorities always had a place to fit first. If we don't build our lives that way, we may have some of these things that don't matter in. We may even have some of the good stuff in there. But all of the things that are priorities, that are valuable to us, will not fit in our lives. And we'll be busy and we'll be running around. But just because we're busy doesn't mean we're living a good life. It could just mean that we're busy with things that don't really matter. And if you've ever been incredibly busy and incredibly frustrated at the same time, it could be because you're wasting all of your time and energy on things that are not valuable to you. And so you don't even know why you're doing them really, other than you said yes when you should have said no. Craig Groeschel puts it this way. He says, good time management doesn't mean you do more. It means you do more of what matters most. The barrier to a meaningful life for most people is not a lack of commitment, but overcommitment. The barrier to a meaningful life for most people is not a lack of commitment, but an overcommitment. And that one stings to me. Because I want to do all of these things, but so many of the things that I end up doing keep me from the things that I should be doing. No one gets me. But if I can say no to some things, then I can have the energy and the margin and the space to say yes to other things. I mean, have you ever noticed that there are some times of day that you work better than others? Like maybe some of you are morning people, and that's good for you. Good for you. And you like to get up early before everybody else, and you get things accomplished then that would take you hours if you waited later in the day to do. For me, I've got this lull in the middle of the afternoon that I know I'm not going to do anything that involves a high level of emotional energy or intellectual energy and focus for a certain number of hours in the afternoon. And so I say no to things that want me to use those kind of big, powerful energy moments in that afternoon space, because I will do a horrible job of it, and it will take me so much longer than if I do it in a different place. And creating that kind of space enables me to live a life that has more energy and actually gets more done and has more impact because of it. In the same way, when I say no to some things, it allows me to say yes to things that energize me. We all have to do things that deplete us. But the only way that we can keep giving is if we fill ourselves up again. We need to fill ourselves spiritually. We take time to fill ourselves, our stomachs when we eat, so our bodies can do things. And our energy level and our emotional state all need refilled again. And different things fit different people. Like my brother would come behind me when I was taking math classes and I was ahead of him, because he loves math and he's good at it, he would see it and he would be able to answer it in his head right every time as he looked over my shoulder, and he would get energized by doing the math. I was working really hard in math, so I didn't have to take math anymore. And I would get depleted and it would take me longer to do it, and I would be exhausted by the time I got done with a math test, where he would be ready to go and find something else to do because it energized him so much. Find what energizes you and use your no to say yes to that, because when your energy is high, when you're filled back up, then you're equipped to go out and do the things that God has called you to do. Because here's the secret. Saying no is actually a gift, because it empowers you to say yes to Jesus. Working harder and working longer will not give you a life of meaning. But saying yes to Jesus always will. We started this whole look at generosity by talking about Alvin Garrett coming to my church and making us dance when none of us could dance. And the point of his message was that we are to keep the first thing first. We're supposed to love God the most. Love Him by creating room to put Him in our life that isn't hurried or distracted, that lets other things go because He's the priority. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you as well. I am desperate for Him. I have got to sit before Him. It is what is best. Because it's there that I realize who I really am. I'm not getting my identity based on my performing. I'm not getting my identity based on how much I've done or how well I've done it. My identity is the fact that I'm sitting before Jesus, the one who loves me and gave Himself for me before I ever did anything that could have deserved that. And that is who I am. And because that's who I am, because I am beloved before I am anything, that empowers me to go and live the life that God has called me to. And the ability to say no to things that get in the way of that, so I can say yes to things that empower and drive that identity back deeper into my soul and enable me to say yes to things that Jesus calls me to do with that. That is what matters. I cannot be truly extravagantly generous unless I am living in the presence of Jesus. That's the power of learning to say no. Lord, I pray that if there's anything that we need to say no to today, you would help us to do it. If there's habits we need to pick up so that we can start to make space in our life to keep you first, help us to do it. And above all things, Lord, help us to make you the priority. For choosing you is always choosing what is best. And if we seek you first and most, all the other things that we worry and strive for, those things will sort themselves out behind the fact that we are yours. We pray these things in your name. Amen.